Hey folks, welcome to the Poor Sports Seattle podcast. Today's guest is Bryce Coutts of the Hawk Zone Rundown. Go check him out there, and he's also affiliated with Field Goals. He's really interesting guy from British Columbia, football coach up there, and we had a really interesting conversation about all the future of the quarterback position in Seattle, as well as like a couple other odds and ends that'll have a factor in quarterback success, offensive line, all the stuff that everyone's talking about. All right, please enjoy Bryce Coutts of Hawk Zone Rundown, and also of a recently renamed, that I can't think of the new name, draft-related podcast with friend of the podcast, Dan Viens. All right, enjoy. Welcome to Poor Sports Seattle. I'm joined by Bryce Coutts. Bryce, could you give me a review on the new song to start it?
I actually really enjoyed it. It was good. It's kind of got a little bit of a good beat to it. Brings you in nice and ready for the show. I like it.
You didn't dance. I noticed you didn't dance. I don't know if you're a dancing type.
Not a dancer. That is not my strong suit.
All right. I have before we get going, I'm going to give a little background because you're Canadian. You live in British Columbia.
Correct.
When I was 19, drinking age in British Columbia is 19, so I went up to British Columbia, and I was at the hotel during the Grey Cup, and I was talking to these old men at the hotel bar, and they were like, there wasn't a lot of hype around the Grey Cup, and they said they liked the NFL more than the CFL up there, so I'm not fully surprised, but I did learn a little bit about the CFL and Canadian football. So the entire field length, end line to end line, not goal line to goal line, end line to end line, 150 yards. It's 120 yards in football. Is that related to the tariffs the United States is putting on? Is there a 25% tariff on Canadian football?
There might be at this point. It might come into play eventually. It's definitely a thing you could talk about. Yeah, no, the field size definitely makes the game much more compelling and interesting. And it really, for me, in the CFL NFL comparison, it's like comparing apples and oranges. So, depending on what the price of those are when they're imported and exported, you never know.
Well, is it only 3 downs in Canadian football too? Yeah, it's a counter tariff. I get it. It's a trade war. We have a football trade war.
We give you one thing back. If you miss a field goal in Canada and it goes to the end zone, you get 1 point.
Wow, that's crazy. I think that's like a social safety net. Would that be
something like that? They feel bad. You tried so hard, us Canadians. You tried so hard, and we figured we'd give you at least a point for it.
So tell me, you coach quarterbacks in British Columbia. Obviously, like I'm sure the football has differences, but it's still a football. It's still throwing a football. Mechanics of throwing a football are the same. How big? I did many years ago in New Westminster at what's now Rick Bronson's House of Comedy, but it used to be Laugh Lines. I actually did a fundraiser for I got a fundraiser added to my weekend. They did not pick me for this fundraiser. I was there for the weekend, and they were like, you want to do this show on Friday also, like the Late Show? And I was broke, and I was like, yes, let's do that. But for whatever, I don't even know what football team up there, but how big is high school level football in Canada?
It's growing quite a bit. The weird thing is, and this is an interesting thing, BC is the only province in all of Canada that plays American rules. So our high school doesn't play Canadian rules. So when I coach and train my quarterbacks, everything for them is American-based. So it's no different than what you guys are accustomed to down there. Everywhere else in Canada plays 3 downs. So when we have what they have as the national tournament every summer called the Canada Cup, when all the provinces put together their teams from all their high school players and stuff, BC tends to be at a slight disadvantage because most kids for 4 years have played American, and then to switch back for a week-long tournament's kind of difficult.
Yeah, that would be tough, I would imagine. So how many players have made? I know there's some players. I'm actually friends with John Ryan, which is just like a circumstance of comedy, basically. His wife is a comedian. By the way, if you're listening, folks, she's at Enumclaw's Chalet Theater this weekend. I'm gonna probably pop in and maybe do a spot. We'll see. But anyways, I know there's Canadians Luke Wilson. Are there any quarterbacks who have made the jump from Canada to America?
and actually got significant snaps.
Sure.
The only one I think you could really hang your cap on is probably Mark Rippon from way back with the Washington Redskins. He was born in Alberta and ended up growing up in the state of Washington and then going off and having a pretty successful NFL career. There's been a couple others. Nathan Rourke, who was down there and now is back with the Lions in BC this past year. Jesse Palmer, a long time ago, made the slight jump there. And then obviously Nathan's brother, Curtis, is currently going through the NFL draft process. So there are some guys that have attempted the jump. It's a lot more difficult to make it, especially given that, you know, when you're talking about the level of competition that they face up here. And even for some of these guys, like Curtis might have the best opportunity because he played at Indiana for his last year, which is a bigger program. Nathan, however, played at Ohio University, so not Ohio State or that, but it makes it a little bit more challenging. And it's hard once you come up to Canada to then try and go back. Like there's been a lot of American guys that have come up the Canadian game, Doug Flutie, a bunch of guys, Jeff Garcia, that have come up, been successful, Warren Moon, and gone back. But it's very hard for a Canadian to go the other way.
I always thought at some point somebody would give Damon Allen a shot, and he never really got another shot in the NFL, right?
No, Damon's game now, if the NFL, like if he was now, he'd be prototypical. Everyone would want a Damon Allen. When he initially came into the CFL and stuff, his game really suited the CFL game because of his ability to extend plays. And at that time, the NFL was very much on, we want 6'5", 200 pounds, stand in the pocket, Drew Bledsoes that can rifle the ball 70 yards down the field on a dime. Not so much, hey, the guy that can ad-lib. And that's why Doug Flutie had such a hard time trying to crack the NFL. He was an exciting way to play the game, but it wasn't the traditional way, per se.
Yeah, I mean, that's like a classic story of the NFL game being behind the times and experimentation and innovation happening at other levels, right? Like at the college level or in the CFL. Damon Allen was Marcus Allen's brother?
Correct, yeah.
All right, I'm not just we're done with the Canadian football facts. We don't have to keep going down that road. So obviously, you have some expertise talking about quarterbacks. The Seahawks have made a couple significant moves recently. Yep. They traded Geno Smith to the Las Vegas Raiders, so I really have a hard time not calling the Oakland Raiders. And they signed Sam Darnold. So to me, for my purposes, if you add the cap space element, it's like a no-brainer. But can you just compare those two guys and factor in their fit with Clint Kubiak's system? Just like if you just, all things being equal, salary cap hit, total salary, age even, is Sam Darnold an upgrade or equal to Geno Smith in your mind?
I would say it's an equal conversation more than necessarily an upgrade. The upgrade you're really getting is the age factor in this and maybe a bit more mobility right now. But if we're calling everything spade to spade and it's all equal, it's an equal conversation, right? You got two guys that have very good arms. They did quite well in college where they were, West Virginia and USC. And they've had very similar NFL careers. They both went to situations with the Jets, ironically enough, where they weren't necessarily ready to play right away. And this goes back to another conversation I have all the time with rookie quarterbacks coming into the NFL and their development level. And are they ready to play right away? And your hit rate's very, very minimal on that. And so when I look at Sam Darnold and what he did coming from Carolina to sit in San Francisco for a year, that really was him actually having some self-awareness of, hey, look, I don't know how to play this game at this level currently. Like I'm just kind of treading water to survive. And if I don't do something to change it, I'm going to be out of the league. And he took that year with Kubiak there in San Francisco, sat behind Purdy, learned, I think, how to play this game. And then you saw the dividends pay when he went to Minnesota and actually got to start last year. And in regards to Geno, you kind of saw the same arc. He went and learned from Eli and Phillip Rivers for a few years, sat behind Russ here for a couple, learned how to play quarterback. So when he got his opportunity in 2022, you really saw a much more polished and refined quarterback that could actually be a starting caliber guy in the NFL.
I think it's a thing that people underestimate about both those guys is, one, I think they assume that Darnold isn't mobile, and they assume that Geno Smith that neither of these guys can throw the ball downfield, and they're both relatively athletic and can both throw the ball downfield. I mean, Geno, that obviously like 2 years ago they do the sprint speed thing, and he's like second on the team in sprint speed, which was hilarious. And he had the big run at the end of the year against, what was it, San Francisco? I'm trying to think of the game that
Yes.
yeah. And I mean, he's, for a 34-year-old guy, that's crazy. I mean, I'm 38. I'm many years removed from being able to run at full speed. I think to be able to do that at that age, obviously some of it comes with not having a ton of tread on the tires from sitting on the bench for so long. But yeah, both those guys, to me, they profile very similarly. And obviously, I think if you factor in age and the cost difference, especially the cost. If the cap hit is really, we still don't know the contract details. Maybe they'll have come out by the time this comes out, but there's some speculation that Darnold's cap hit is going to be like below $20 million next year. It's a pretty big win.
Yeah, it's a very big win. And when you look at even their stats from last year, so Geno threw for 43-20 and Sam threw for 43-19. There was a 1 yard difference between the two. The difference you see is touchdowns to interceptions. Geno threw 3 more. Sam also threw 35 touchdowns to Geno's 21. Geno, however, had the higher completion percentage. He was completing 70%. He also, I think, had more attempts. And when you look at it with Ryan Grubb and what he asked him to do, but Donald wasn't far off. He's at a 66. And if you have an NFL quarterback that's completing over 65% of his passes, you're in pretty good company. And so I just look at it and I go, I understand the move from the Seattle point of view. And from people that I've talked to and sources and stuff, it wasn't a planned decision. They weren't planning on, hey, we're moving off of Geno Smith to Sam Darnold. But as soon as Geno didn't even offer a counteroffer when Seattle came to him, it then became, okay, we have to pivot. And the best way to pivot, let's pivot to someone 7 years younger that still has starting experience.
Yeah, I mean, that seemed like, again, it seemed pretty obvious. I'm an analytics guy. I was pretty... So you talked about the like total yards. I believe that their performance above expected completion percentage, it was like 3.3 and 3.2%. Their PFF grades were both like really close to each other, within a couple points of each other. The one thing that Darnold did, which I think will dispel a little bit of this idea that he's just like a dink and dunk, I think we think of the West Coast offense as like the worst version of Joe Montana can really succeed in it. I believe his average depth of target was 2 yards further downfield than Geno Smith, which was surprising to me. How much of that do you think is having Justin Jefferson and just being able to throw up 50-50 balls and know they're really 80-20 balls?
Honestly, I think the biggest factor in that, if you look and dig a little bit deeper into those numbers, a lot of their chunk plays from Minnesota last year came off of their play action. And their biggest thing was they were able to run the ball with Aaron Jones in that backfield, and they were able to at least assemble somewhat of a run game, so teams had to respect it, where Seattle never got that going last year. So that's where you see those numbers a little bit more in Darnold's favor, is he could take those deeper shots to Justin Jefferson or, Addison, and there's a higher chance they're going to work because of the fact that a safety's moved down into the box to defend the run. Where for Geno's case, a lot of the teams were able to stay in 2I because Seattle couldn't run the ball to save their life last year. So that's where I think you see that number favor Darnold, is because of the play action deep shots they were able to execute properly in Minnesota.
So it's this feels very similar to signing Matt Flynn and drafting Russell Wilson, right? Like the obviously at that time the Seahawks, they had already moved on from Matt Hasselbeck a couple years earlier. What I really think that I got a lot of criticisms about the Seahawks front office, but I actually think they've handled the quarterback position kind of remarkably well, despite not having like investing a ton up front. Obviously, they end up with the one huge contract with Russell Wilson. But outside of that, I mean, they've never really pinned themselves into a corner with any quarterback. And the way they did it was they signed Tavares Jackson after they traded for Charlie Whitehurst, and then signed Matt Flynn, and then draft Russell Wilson. And they just kept throwing moderate risks at the wall until one of them hit. And this kind of feels like that. And I think people are going to be surprised if they move on from Sam Darnold after a year or two. Do you think this is like the quarterback of the future, or?
I think it's so. Initially, when I saw this all come down and they moved to Sam and they had signed Sam, I went, okay, here's your stopgap. Like you're gonna go get somebody, and that's where this whole conversation comes around Jackson Dart and all these other draft prospects, or even next year's class. Now, the thing for me that's very interesting about this is you have it where it's basically a 2-year deal, and then your third year you can get out with next to no dead cap money on you, and it makes it really easy. But if Sam does come and play well, and he is winning football games, and they're winning the division, and they're getting 10 plus wins a year, it's a lot harder to say, okay, cool, we're moving off this guy because of his age. He's only 27, he'll be 28. So even if you were to give him a new contract, he's still going to be younger than Gino at the time that Gino was going to sign this deal. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know if Sam's the QB of the future. I wouldn't necessarily anoint that yet until you see him play. He's the QB for right now, and I do think Seattle will address the position in the draft because the way I look at it is the guy that I think has the most to lose in all of this is really Sam Howell. And I think it's going to be more about whoever they draft is really competing with Sam Howell to see if they're going to keep Sam Howell. I don't think, and from what I've heard, there's not a lot of people that were too in that building that were too impressed with what Sam put on the field when he was in there last year, and even through training camp, like he really struggled. And so there's a chance that if they do draft somebody in the late day 2 kind of area, that guy's coming in to take Sam Howell's job away and not Sam Darnold's, and that Sam Darnold could be here for longer than his 3-year term. It all depends on how Sam Darnold performs and this team does over that time.
Yeah, I've thought about that a lot because so last year I got into an argument with some friends of mine about whether or not teams actually carry 3 quarterbacks on their active roster, and about half the teams in the NFL do. Historically, the Seahawks have not been one of those teams, but also historically they don't have rookies that they just drafted, right? Like the last quarterback they drafted was Alex Magoo in the 7th round out of which Alex Magoo, his own family has never heard of him. Like that, nobody knows who Alex Magoo is. Do you think this is a year? Because I keep hearing about this. Like Clint Kubiak wants a fullback, and he's going to want a larger running back room. Period, and maybe want extra tight ends because he might have more tight. And if you start talking about like you only have like 6 or 7 spots that you can really flex around on a roster. And are they going to carry 3 quarterbacks, or are they going to have to use that spot for a running back, a tight end, an extra offensive lineman?
I think it's really going to come down to what transpires in free agency over the next week or so here and how they fill out some of these holes on this roster. As of us recording right now, they've only signed 1 offensive lineman. It's really going to depend on what they do there. And that even comes down to whether or not they draft a quarterback this year. I know a lot of people point and go, yeah, they're going to draft somebody this year. Yeah, there's a good chance, but if somehow in the way the draft's falling and the board's falling, they may line up and take another running back, or they may take another tight end or lineman in a mid-round pick that you thought, hey, there's Quinn Ewers or Will Howard or one of these guys sitting there, and let's take a shot on one of them. They may go, no, we need to do this, and pivot to 2026 as the year that they're going to take their quarterback. It all depends on what kind of transpires over the next month or so and on whether or not Seattle will carry 3. The other guy that I think that they want to bring back and bring into this conversation is even Jaren Hall. They really like Jaren Hall. And again, if they do bring in a quarterback, there may be a 3-way competition for who's number 2. And Howell and Hall may be in a situation where they lose out because if it's a Quinn Ewers or it's a Will Howard, we've got them on club control for 4 years, so we don't have to worry about it, and they're cheap. And maybe that means they sneak one of these veteran guys, a Howell or a Howell, onto the practice squad, and that's what they do for the years. They keep them there, and then they bring them up on game days or whatever it may be.
I've had this dream since the idea of drafting Anthony Richardson came into my mind, and I'm obviously the results. I was scared of Anthony Richardson for a lot of reasons. At the time, the Seahawks had an established veteran quarterback, so I was not that worried about the immediate success of the Seahawks, but I thought it would have been very interesting to have Richardson on the roster and just to bring him in like a Taysom Hill-like role where he's like Taysom Hill like 0.5. Like he's so much more athletic than Taysom Hill is very athletic. He would be so much more athletic. Do you see a spot like how late into the draft would it make sense to draft Jalen Milroe in that kind of a role, with the idea that you could develop him potentially to be your starting quarterback? But a guy like Jalen Milroe has such unique athletic traits. It feels like you could get a lot out of him without having to like put all of the pressure of being the quarterback of the future on him right away.
I think Jalen Milroe, now that the Sam Darnold signing has occurred, has become a much more intriguing prospect for Seattle fans. And that may cause some to lose their minds because of what they've seen, but
sure,
he would have the ability, like you said, to sit and learn and not be forced into you need to play in the next year or two. Hey, you might play in 4 years. You're still young enough that you're only 25 when you finally get on the field. That's fine. Or you're only 24. That's fine. And yeah, you could use him in some sort of wildcat situation. I think the Taysom Hill role, though, for Seattle, there's a guy that they have from last year in Plumlee, who I think is someone that they've converted strictly over to a receiver, but has a bit of that QB skill. He may be a guy. And honestly, I think Kyle Juszczyk is someone that there's a good chance Seattle may go knocking on his door now that he's a free agent and knows the system all too well.
Yeah, so John Reese Plumlee, I actually didn't even realize because he got signed. He was rumored to be a Seahawks target and then ended up signing a UDFA deal somewhere else, which was surprising because I think the Seahawks used like a 30 visit on him, right? Like they really put a lot of time in the pre-draft process. And maybe that was him saying like, you guys, screw you guys, you spent all this time and led me on and then didn't draft me. But then obviously they believe in him and they brought him in on their practice squad in like, was it January or so? It was very late in the 2024 season. Is that a dude that you're like, I mean, I guess obviously everything obviously comes with the caveat that like if they go add Taysom Hill, probably John Reese Plumlee doesn't fill that role, right? If they go literally add Taysom Hill. But is that a guy that you think is like, if nobody gets added that's an obvious comp, like a Jalen Milroe or literally Taysom Hill, or even Kyle Juszczyk, is John Reese Plumlee making this team and playing 100 snaps next year?
I don't know if he's making it and playing 100 snaps. I think there's a good chance he's really in the conversation to make this team. If Clint Kubiak sees him as a fit for that role, that will be his type of role. He's not going to come in and be a true receiver. That's just not in his, makeup right now after just converting to the position. It'll be in some sort of gadget role where you can run wildcat with him. You can run a jet sweep pass with him. You can do some of those things, which when it comes to the short yardage are things you like to have. And Clint Kubiak has said he likes to have in his repertoire. So that's how I think if Plumlee makes it, but it's going to come down to what does Seattle do at the receiver position as a whole? What do they do at the tight end / fullback position? And is there room for him on this roster as that? Maybe it'd say, hey, we're going to keep you as our practice squad guy like we did this year. And if there's a matchup we like versus a certain team, you will get activated in that role for that game. And if he does well, maybe then he sticks on the roster. That's, I think, what you're going to see the arc of for John Rice Plumlee. So Kubiak is going to run, it seems like anyway, several fewer 3 receiver sets than in past years. And Jackson Smith-Njigba has been I was not thrilled with the pick. All the scouting profile stuff made him seem like kind of a generic slot receiver to me. And then there wasn't the combine to fall back on to be like, well, this guy runs a 4.35 and jumps out of the gym. And I don't think he is that guy, by the way. Like, I don't think he has those kinds of athletic traits, but he's proven me wrong. He had a great year last year, and he's I think an underrated like yards after the catch physical guy. However, I think we've always thought of him as a guy who would like really excel in the slot with 2 outside receivers. And maybe the idea was like, obviously he had DK Metcalf to one side. Eventually Tyler Lockett would be replaced by somebody younger. Now the situations seems like it's going to be quite a bit different. He's going to be playing on the outside quite a bit more. You think that's going to hurt Jackson Smith-Njigba? No, actually, I think it might be better for Jackson Smith-Njigba. And that was the one thing. When everyone kind of pigeonholed him into he's only a slot receiver, and that's what he's going to make his living on, I kind of went, he's not he's twitchy, but he's not twitchy enough to be a true slot. That's all he can play.
Right.
And then watching him as he's developed, and even last year, you saw him split out wide more. You saw him do more of those things and move around. And then after DK got hurt and then came back, they really figured out how to move JSM, which was hey, we're going to move him all over the place. He's going to play outside. He's going to play inside. He'll, reduce his split on certain plays. And I think he's going to be, in some respects, Seattle's Z to a point. I know people like to talk in the terms of X and Z's, and DK was next because he was so big. And, they just got MVS now, signed him today, and MVS is going to be your deep threat. That's what he's going to be. But your X receiver could be potentially JSN and move him around. Like, he's not going to be a big body guy. It's going to be really interesting to see what they do. I think JSN, you're going to see a Cooper Kupp type of career arc for him, but maybe with less injury problems that Cooper Kupp's dealt with. And again, that's a guy I'd love to see Seattle sign and bring in here as Cooper Kupp, because I think he would play a very nice role in this offense. And again, be a guy that JSN could learn for, still help mentor him as both Tyler now and DK are gone. But also, I still think has enough left in the tank to be a viable number 2 option to JSN.
Yeah, it's kind of been interesting to think about, because we spent so much time with Mike Holmgren here, where it was like, I don't know the personnel groupings. Is it one tight end, fullback, running back, and then 2 receivers? What is this called? What's the number combination that?
Say that again. If it's what?
So 2 receivers, 1 tight end, 2 running backs. Is that 2-1-2?
That's 21 personnel. 21
personnel. Okay. What's the? We don't need to get into all that. I'm so shitty at that stuff. But I think we've gotten into this, like, the idea of a slot receiver is almost what that's going to be we're going to be a little bit back to the early 2000s and the 90s, where that's a guy who plays a third of your snaps instead of 80% of your snaps, probably, right?
Correct. Like the offense that Clint Kubiak and Shanahan and McVay and even Kevin O'Connell and everyone that's derivative, it comes out of, Bill Walsh's original system, which Mike Holmgren learned from, which then he taught Mike Shanahan, and Shanahan and Kubiak changed it a little bit, especially on the run game side of things. It's a lot of 12 and 21 personnel sets, and there's a little bit of 11, but what you're looking for is the targeting we saw that went to our third receiver, our slot receiver last year. You're going to see that go to a tight end more than anything. You're going to see it go to A.J. Barner, or it's going to go to someone that they draft. If Noah Fant's still here, it might be him. You won't see as many of these 11 personnel sets just because of the way they want to establish the run and set the edge on the run. You need to have guys out there that are a bit of a bigger body. And when you have, and the way the defenses play now with it too high and they play a lot of nickel, you can take advantage of that running the 21 and 12 personnel.
11 is 1 tight end, 1 running back.
Correct.
21 is 2 running backs, 1 tight end.
Yep.
Running backs first, tight end, and then the receivers are the remainder.
Correct.
Okay. I'm going to try to remember this. This is like a thing every couple of years. I remember like 4 years ago, I feel like everybody learned the technique of all the linemen, and everyone had to make sure they said that. I know you coach, so it's a little bit less obnoxious, but yes, I feel like the jargony stuff like that, I just like, I'm always behind on. Do you think? I know you've been talking about Kyle Juszczyk on social media. Let's say that doesn't happen. Whether he goes, I don't know if he's got a lot of options. He's like the one last true fullback in the NFL, right? So if he's not there, is there a tight end on the roster? I've heard Brady Russell's name floated. Can Noah Fant fill that role in any way? Can AJ Barner fill that role in any way?
AJ Barner, maybe. I wouldn't want to put him there. I think AJ Barner is really going to become tight end 1 for Seattle this year. Noah Fant, I don't think there's a chance. He's just not a good enough blocker. Brady Russell, potentially. Brady Russell has to stay healthy first and foremost.
Do you think Fant stays on the roster if he's not tight end 1?
I don't. It'll be interesting because I think it's going to come down to if they, like, obviously they've made some moves today. They're probably going to have a couple more. They might need to free up more cap space, and if they do, I think that's where you look at what are they doing with Chenna right now and Nwosu and his contract and Noah Fant, and if they're going to keep him at that cap hit. I think the thing they've got in this class, and again, this is going to be the draft class, you got guys like Harold Fanning Jr., which I think would be an ideal fit if you can't get Kyle Juszczyk. There's the guy you get to replace him. He can play your H-back. He can play your tight end. He can give you a lot of the same stuff. The reason why I think Kyle Juszczyk becomes so much more intriguing to Seattle is I don't think he's going to have a lot of options. He fits in only a certain type of system, and he brings some leadership to this offense on the Seattle Seahawks. And that was one thing with a lot of these guys, Geno being gone, Tyler being gone, DK. Noah Fant is your oldest starter on that team at 27. Right. That's a very young offense, along with Sam Darnold being 27, but really a carryover guy I'm talking about in this case. And so you need some veteran leadership in that regard. And I think a guy like a Kyle Juszczyk comes in, you can see it, his resume speaks for itself. I think he's a guy that you could definitely have as a leader for that offense.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess like just on paper, if you're just playing like Stratomatic football, I'm like, I don't want Kyle Juszczyk on the team, but if I suppose if it's in that type of a role, it makes some sense. To me, it feels impossible that Fant's going to make this roster. And Fant's a guy that I've liked. I mean, that athletic profile from a tight end obviously is very exciting. I was hoping the Seahawks would get a chance to draft him in a round I would have liked. Did he end up going in the first, or was he a second-round pick?
Noah Fant, he was, I believe, a first-round pick to the Denver Broncos.
Yeah, I would have been upset if the Seahawks drafted him in the first round, but I was excited to see it, and he just never has really put it together. Like, he's never put together. I mean, at the beginning of this season, it seemed like he was doing it, and then it's just never really come together.
It's interesting because his receiving capability is very positively has a positive outlook for this offense. Mm-hmm. The one thing with this offense that is going to be a big change, and if you look at the history of it, the big receiver, the big receiving threat, the physical guy is usually the tight end. You look at San Francisco, it's been George Kittle. You look at the Rams, it's been Tyler Higbee. They went and got Colby Parkinson last year to help out. You look at Kevin O'Connell, it's TJ Hawkinson. You look at teams, even when Gary Kubiak was running this offense, it was Owen Daniels with the Houston Texans. It's very much where they want their big physical presence is to be inside the hashes, running the seam, running the hook, running the over route. And your outside receivers are much more route running technicians than they necessarily are big physical targets. And that's where I think even for DK, when you look at the whole totality of this trade, part of it I think is DK knew he wasn't going to fit that well in the system. DK runs a handful of routes well, which is his post, which is his hook, which is his slant, and which is his go. Mm-hmm. He doesn't run a great dig. He doesn't run a great climb route. He's just not that. Those are routes you saw JSN run, and JSN runs them very well. And it's one of those things where I look at for DK, and I believe I just got to pull this up because I saw it today, and I believe it was Brett Coleman that put it out. And it was a really good tweet because it really talked about here it is. He goes, in regards to DK's fit in Seattle, a big part of the Kubiak's lineage in this offense is having a number one that is really good at these routes, usually off of play action, the high cross, the high corner, and the backside dig. DK caught 7 of those combined all of last season.
Yeah, I saw that tweet too.
That is very much what this offense is based on. That's where a guy like a JSN, and if they go in this draft, there's a couple guys in this draft that I think are really key guys that Seattle should target in this receiving class that fit that. And that's where a guy like an MVS, he's going to do your stretch vertically for you, which is fine. He's also not going to play 70 to 60% of the snaps on the offense in a given game.
So I think it's something a lot of us learned about last year with regard to DK is when he would run like a lazy route. I mean, there were a couple like glaring examples where him running a lazy route left Geno out to dry, and it leads to interceptions that look like Geno's a dumbass because he threw this ball that was like very obviously not, but he expected DK to break the route off and run it harder. And I guess I just want to quantify this. How many times in a game do you think that's happening? I have a friend that was that I was arguing with that maybe I'm just settling one argument with a buddy of mine. But I assume not every time that happens does it lead to an egregious interception, right? Is DK running sloppy routes 50% of the time and it's leading to incompletions or him just not getting open?
I don't know if I'd say 50% of the time, but I think there's points in it where if DK didn't realize he was the number one target, or something like that occurred where he realized he was fourth in progression or whatever, he may not have because he didn't even think the ball was going to come to him. And there's a few of those where, like, I look at the one against the Minnesota Vikings towards the end of the game there where Geno throws the pick after the Vikings have gone up and they're trying to move the ball. And you look at DK. DK, I don't even think expected the ball to come to him because there were three defenders around him anyways. He expected it to go somewhere else. And the one this year that I look at where I go, okay, DK, that one was on you, was the game against San Francisco at home. That's that high crosser route that we're talking about, that Brett Coleman's talking about, that is a staple in this offense. And in my offense, it's a staple. And you have to be able to run that route precisely across the field at a certain depth as it climbs. And if you at all deviate and the quarterback comes to it and he throws it in a particular spot, that DB's got a clear shot at it. And that's exactly what we saw. The undercut and Pickett, and everyone's blaming Geno. That is more of a DK Metcalf not running the route correctly interception than anything.
I want to talk about some of the young quarterbacks because I guess first off, I want to get a feel for how you felt about the Kirk Cousins, Michael Penix situation in Atlanta, because, and I'll tell you my opinion first. I have some friends that are analytics guys that think that I gave that move an A+. They were giving it an F because everyone has to be either F's or A's, right? You can't have anything in between. I would have given it a B-. I don't think it's a great move, but I thought, in my opinion, it's like the way the Seahawks have handled the quarterback position. They're acknowledging that it's the most important position, and you got to take as many shots at it as possible. And by the way, if you're a Falcons fan, you got to be thrilled they took Penix at 8 at this point because Cousins cratered. And it's putting all of your eggs in one basket is fraught because eggs are fragile, and so yeah. Can you tell me what you thought then, and if your opinion has changed now?
When they made that selection, I thought it was actually, as crazy as it sounds, I thought it was a brilliant move by Atlanta with some foresight. The reason why is you're signing Kirk Cousins. Yes, you gave him a boatload of money. Yes, you guaranteed a lot of that contract. But you also weren't banking on Kirk Cousins to be your QB of the future either. And going and getting a guy of the value of Michael Penix, where he got to in the draft, you're going and you're setting yourself up for success 10, 15 years rather than, okay, we're looking at what's right in front of us, this next step. The Falcons were looking at what's up the staircase. Mm-hmm. How are we going to get to the door at the top of the staircase? Are we going to just take it one step at a time and hope we don't trip? Or are we going to be able to look ahead and go, okay, hey, there's these obstacles here, but if we get this piece, it's going to make it that much easier for us to get up there. When you take that quarterback like a Michael Penix in the first round, you really get a year for free in some respects with that fifth-year option ability, right? So if he sits and he doesn't play a lot, and then he comes in year 2 like he's going to do this year and play, you still have that extra year to evaluate him if you really want to. And for me, when they made that decision, I thought, okay, this is a great spot for him. He's got some weapons to throw the ball to. He's got an offensive coordinator that comes out of the LA Rams system in Zach Robinson. And they look like they're doing things the right way in Atlanta. Now, like you said, there's people that give it an A and there's people that give it an F. I give it a B+ because I still think, yes, it was a right move, but given what else you may have needed at the time, maybe there was another guy you could have took there that would have had an immediate impact and helped set up Kirk Cousins for more success. But you really did the right thing in setting up your franchise for longevity.
So the Seahawks have the 18th pick, and now they have like 5 picks in the first 100 and a bunch of picks all down this draft. Obviously, I mean, it's a comparable situation because they just brought in a quarterback, happens to be from Minnesota also. I'm not putting a lot of weight on that part of it, but they brought in a quarterback on a multi-year deal to replace a guy that for whatever reason was struggling in some ways. They have the 18th overall pick. I don't think there's anyone that you're going to feel thrilled about taking there, even if Jackson Dart does go in the first round. I think whoever takes him, there's going to be some concession that it's like, you got to take this guy because you got to have a quarterback, right? Nobody's thrilled to be taking Jackson Dart in the first round, I don't think. Should the Seahawks be considering Jackson Dart at 18, which is a question of both. I mean, is he good enough? And also, like, is he better than the rest of the class enough to justify taking him at 18, especially now that they have these four other top 100 picks?
That's a really tough one. I really like Jackson Dart's tape. But the thing for me with Jackson Dart, and this is where it's going to be interesting, is I think you're going to see Shedeur Sanders slide, which is going to force Jackson Dart to slide a little bit. And I know people are going to go, no, Jackson Dart will jump him. I don't think anyone looks at this quarterback class and goes, there are elite QB prospects that can play in the first 2 years and have a Jaden Daniels, have a Michael Penix even to a point, or a Bo Nix type of success. There just isn't in this class. Even Cam Ward, I don't see it. I see guys that all need to sit for a year or two and all need to be developed. And so with that being said, I think this draft offers competitive starters. So a Jackson Dart, a Quinn Ewers, a Will Howard, a Kyle McCord, a Tyler Shuck. Those are guys I look at that go, yeah, you give them 2 years, maybe not so much Tyler Shuck. He might need to play a little sooner, just given age. But you give them a couple years behind an established starter without the pressure to come save our franchise, you're going to get good players. You're going to get good quarterbacks that are going to be in that range from, say, the top 20 to the top 10, those kind of guys. And so with pick 18 for Seattle, you've gone and this is where, to our earlier point where I said, I don't know if Sam Darnold's the future. I know he's the right now. I look at pick 18 and go, you need to go address your offensive line, because even if you go get that rookie quarterback and that offensive line is still Swiss cheese and not developing, it doesn't matter who you have back there. They're not going to have the success you want them to. So I don't know if pick 18 is the right spot for Seattle to take a quarterback. Now, if we're talking pick, 50, 52, 82, or 92, any of their other four in the top 100, yeah, maybe at pick 52, if a Howard's there or Quinn Ewers, or even if Jackson Dart slides, there is an opportunity there now to take that guy. And I think it's an easier point of selling it than it is of, hey, we took him at 18, great, but now you see like a Membu or a Calvin Banks or a Kenneth Grant or some of these guys go off the board and you go, well, but that guy could really help the future outlook of this franchise by getting this offensive line or increasing the defense and giving Mike McDonald more pieces on that end.
What are so I want to talk about three more things before we go. One of them is, at the end, I'd like to do just like a quick association of, here's a quarterback, what's the earliest you'd like to see the Seahawks take him?
Okay.
I'm curious about the offensive line, and there's one quarterback I want to talk about in particular, but the offensive line, who do you think, what offensive linemen do you think are worth taking? And it can be just a list if you want, taking at 18, because for the Seahawks in particular, I got into an argument with someone about Tyler Booker today, because I feel like, to me, Tyler Booker is very, like, what I think his measurables are make him somewhat like Brandon Albert, in that, not that he's got the athletic profile, quite the athletic profile, but he's a guy that, like, his measurables make him a tackle, in my opinion. Like, he feels like he can play tackle, and it's rare that guys move outside coming out of college. I don't think he can play tackle or guard in Seattle very well personally, but give me your thoughts on Tyler Booker, and then who are the guys you would be willing to take at 18?
So Tyler Booker, I actually really like him as a guard because he's got this nasty mean streak. I don't know how well he'd do as a tackle on an island, and that's the one question I have with him, is how good is he going to be at handling edge pressure and stuff on the outside when he's now in space. Tyler Booker, though, is going to come into any locker room and the O-line and be a leader. That is what he is. So at 18 for Seattle, if Tyler Booker's there, yeah, I'm okay with that pick, and I think that's a good pick. Now, I've seen a lot of people go, oh, well, he's a gap power scheme guy, not a zone guy. You can work those skill sets into an offensive lineman and help curve them in whatever way you need to. And I think what you'll see with Clint Kubiak's system is, yes, it is a primarily wide zone run, but they do run some gap power. They do mix it up. So as long as you can do that and still have some stuff built in there to play to your player's strengths, you'll see success. So Tyler Booker to me does make a lot of sense. And let me just pull up my list here. I'm just going to find it for the O-line. But yeah, the thing with Booker, though, and this is going to be the other part for him, is I know a lot of people are going to get James Carpenter vibes.
Is it just a big dude from Alabama that causes that?
I think that's the PTSD.
Okay.
And I think it's even Anthony Bradford, a big dude from the SEC, like there's a guy I'll tell you right now, I don't think will be on this roster for Seattle this year, is Anthony Bradford.
Does he get traded or is he just going to get cut?
I think it'll depend on how his preseason goes. I think they'll carry him through preseason, but it'll be one of those situations where if John does trade him, it'll be like, oh, we're trading him to the New England Patriots for a slot corner and something, or a 5th round pick or 6th round pick or something like that.
Could he end up down in Oakland, do you think? Or not in Oakland, in Las Vegas?
Potentially, yeah, because again, Pete, that's going to be the thing. The cast-offs from Seattle are going to have a place they can go.
Sure.
Here we go. I just had to find it. Yeah, Tyler Booker's one for me, and then Armand Membu is another one I'm in love with.
Seems like he's not going to be there, right?
No, I think he's freaking played himself into the top 10. Yeah. Sadly, I'm kind of like, damn it, that's not a guy I want to see go there. Calvin Banks is kind of falling, which is interesting to me. The thing I look for when I'm looking at this, the thing with Booker that is the only hesitancy I have with it, is he is a pure guard. That is what he is. Where when I look at like a Will Campbell, a Membu, Donovan Jackson, Calvin Banks, even to a point, they can all kick into guard and then kick out to tackle. And that's where, if I'm going to take one of these guys at 18, this is where I might take one of those guys, because of the fact of you don't know what Abe Lucas is going to be like this year. If Abe Lucas struggles and doesn't come back, even though all intents and purposes and what he's putting out on social media look like he is going to be back to normal Abe. Excuse me. You're hedging against that, and you're also hedging against Charles Cross. Like, if Charles Cross comes out and absolutely bombs this year, then you're going, okay, crap, what do we do at the tackle position? Mm-hmm. If you take a Calvin Banks or a Membu or, a Donovan Jackson, you can go, yeah, okay, if Abe's not back, great. We just kick you out to tackle. Yes, we're looking for a guard again, but you're not in a situation where you're trying to look for a tackle. And tackles, to me, are a harder thing to hit on, especially the later you get in the draft, than the guard is. Guards you can find later on. We've seen, you look at Green Bay and the Packers offensive line last year came in and ran the ball all over Seattle. Most of their interior line was either late to mid-round picks or undrafted free agents. And so that's where I think you can get away with guards. And you look at Seattle's history with guards. J.R. Sweezy was a good guard. Chris Gray was a good guard. You're not looking at guys that were highly, highly drafted. Steve Hutchinson's the only one you can kind of shake that stick at. But to get to my list, Tyler Booker's on it. Armand Membu's on it. Tate Ratledge is someone I like too a lot.
You take him at 18?
Not at 18. Not at 18. If we're going just purely 18, my 4 guys I would say at 18 for me, Calvin Banks, and no particular order, Calvin Banks, Tyler Booker, Membu, and Will Campbell.
Okay. Yeah, that's by the way, I've been saying all offseason that whether you want them to or not, I think that the way they value the interior offensive line, if they take an offensive lineman at 18, it's going to be a guy that can play tackle and will probably play guard for a couple of years because of that exact thing. And Abe is always a question mark. That's a complete mystery, his long-term health, but because they haven't actually picked up Cross's 5th-year option yet, right? Do you think that they will?
I think they will, just given the value of it. It's a good value for a 5th-year option. And I think they also want to see, how does he fit into this new scheme? This is the whole thing now, right? You got to think about, for these O-linemen that they've drafted, and a lot of these players, Ken Walker even you could include into it, they have had 3 different offensive coordinators going on to their 3rd offensive coordinator in their 4 years. Mm-hmm. Like, you had Shane Waldron for 2, now Ryan Grubb, now you're on to Clint Kubiak, who all run, like, Shane Waldron ran a variation of McVay's system. Ryan Grubb was very departed from this. And now you're coming back to an origin source of the West Coast wide zone run scheme and play action game in Clint Kubiak. And so I think a lot of this for the offense this year is going to be evaluation. Like, does Charles Cross fit this? Does Abe Lucas? Does Ken Walker fit this? I think he's going to fit this fabulously. Mm-hmm. But those are kind of the things that are going to be questions that are going to happen, because I do not believe the way that they have constructed this offensive staff that there is any inclination this staff is going anywhere after this year. It would take a massive offensive explosion for Seattle, for Clint Kubiak to get any sort of head coaching offers. And to be honest, and I don't mean to be mean about the guy, I think Clint Kubiak's going to be a phenomenal coach, and I really like him. He doesn't give you that kind of pop as a head coach. When you listen to his press conference, it's very dry. It's very kind of, this is what it is, and this is how it's going to be. And Mike McDonald initially was like that, but now he's gotten a bit of flavor to him. I think that's more Mike's personality. I don't know if it's Clint's, because if you listen to his dad, it's almost identical. Like, I heard some people say it, and for me, it really dawned on me that if you looked at Clint Kubiak, it was like the AI constructed version of Gary Kubiak. That is what it literally looked like to me. I was like, oh man, listening to him and seeing him, it's like, oh, it's AI built Gary again.
That's funny.
But that's where I kind of look at it. So I think you're going to see this offensive staff really evaluate these players, and that's where I look at when people are panicking right now about the Seahawks offensive line and not adding anybody in free agency and the whole Will Fries thing and everything. I think they're also banking on Rick Dennison and these guys that they brought in, which has got a very big O-line background on all of these coaches they brought in, to make a guy like a Christian Haynes work and fix that kind of player. Like, those are going to be the interesting kind of things, is what Seattle does with also their in-house talent.
Is there any chance Haynes gets some run? So he played some center at the Senior Bowl, and then I feel like we've never heard about that since, but the reviews were good at the Senior Bowl. They have, like, theoretically all three interior offensive line spots are up for the taking. Could he end up at center, or is he guard only, you think?
I think with this new system, he's guard only, because this is what he ran at UConn.
Gotcha.
Now, I don't know what side he's going to be, if he's going to be a right or he's going to be a left. I think it'll very much depend on who Seattle drafts at 18, what side Christian Haynes is on. I think LeMaya is going to stay at guard. I think he can be a guard in the system and be your backup and potentially even start maybe, but I think there is a lot of focus on getting Christian Haynes to work, because last year, all the analysts and everybody had him rated as essentially the Tyler Booker, in a way, of the best pure guard in the draft. And for him to bomb as badly as he did last year, I put that more on Scott Huff and Ryan Grubb than I put it on the player, to a point, because the one thing I'll look at is LeMaya came in and had success. Scott Huff, if you watch the Seahawks phone calls with their draft picks, talked about how he had been hunting LeMaya at Washington and all this kind of stuff to get him there. Scott Huff loved LeMaya, and I think he understood how to use him better, where I don't think they necessarily understood how to get the most out of Christian Haynes. I think also Haynes will benefit from a year in an NFL program now. He can get in the weight room. He can do those things. He knows how to be a bit more of a pro. That's where I think you're going to see the benefit for Christian Haynes.
All right, let me talk to you about one quarterback, and then we'll quickly talk about a handful of them. I'm a big Quinn Ewers fan. Coming out of high school, I thought he was an interesting prospect, and then he ends up at Texas under Sark. And I'm a Huskies fan, so I've kind of always watched Sark at Texas with interest. And he's been mercurial. I feel like he put his best year forward to a degree this year, or at least the gutsiest year, the year that kind of answered any of the questions about him kind of not living up to maybe being a little bit of a soft version of the hype that he had. I have a comparison that I floated by mutual friend Dan Viennes for Quinn Ewers that I want to run by you and tell me if you think it's, because Dan's very nice. He could have been completely bullshitting me that it was a decent comp, but I think I think he's Geno Smith.
Yeah, I could see it. It's interesting for me with Quinn Ewers, because I really like a lot of what Quinn Ewers has done, and I think he gets kind of a bad rap because of how he has had struggling points. I hate Steve Sarkisian's offense. I hate all the stupid bubble screens and lateral play calls, let the ball go down the field a bit, which I think in turn kind of almost worsened Quinn's stock for himself in some respects. I see the Geno Smith comp. I see it in a lot of what Quinn does. My comp for Quinn Ewers in some respects is a physically more gifted Brock Purdy.
Okay. That sounds great, right?
Yeah, he's got the quick release. He's mobile enough. He can move. He can do your boot actions and stuff. That's why I think he's such a good fit in the Seattle offense. Now, the other thing for me with him that I could see is he is a poor man's Matt Stafford in some respects. Again, similar qualities, similar ability to make off-platform throws. Again, injury issues, concerns there. But like you look at it, like my notes here that I've got for Quinn Ewers is, he's why he fits in Seattle. He's got the arm talent to push the ball down the field, and that aligns with Kubiak's play action emphasis. His pocket presence and suits the system and thrives in quick reads. He'll need O-line help. He needs to get a little bit better at moving in the pocket, but he can handle pressure. Look at the Texas pressure that he did have to handle with having Arch there, having to, be a top team. Their O-line struggled at points throughout the year, and he still was able to still execute the offense. It'll be interesting. I think he's going to go higher than people expect. I think he's going to go late round 2, mid round 3 area. And that's where I think the one thing with Quinn Ewers and why I think for me right now on Seattle's board, he's probably at the top, maybe neck and neck with Jackson Dart, is connections. And John Schneider always talks about connections. And he's working with Mike McCarthy, who John absolutely respects and adores. And so if Mike McCarthy comes to him and says, hey, gives John a call on day 2, if Quinn's there at this point, you need to take him, I think you'll see the Seattle Seahawks select Quinn Ewers.
Yeah, it feels a lot like there was a lot of talk about Russell Wilson leading up to Russell Wilson getting drafted, and it feels like that kind of moment again where they feel like they're betrothed to each other. Okay, I want to run a couple quarterbacks by you that might be available when the Seahawks pick at 18 or later, and just have you tell me. We can end the podcast with this. I know that I'm bumping up against the amount of time I told you I would take up of yours.
It's all good.
So just the earliest round you'd be willing to take this person. It doesn't have to be a specific Seahawk pick number necessarily. So Jalen Milroe.
Ooh, Jalen Milroe, I would be taking him in the late 2nd, early 3rd round.
Okay. Will Howard?
3rd round.
Riley Leonard?
5th.
Okay, I'm pretty aligned with you on this. How about Dylan Gabriel?
UDFA.
Hell yeah, dude. I'm on the Tyler Shuck?
4th round.
Okay. That's an interesting one. So that's because he might be collecting Social Security by the time he gets to play. I guess 2 years, he'll be 27 years old, and the same age as Sam Darnold with a little bit of time under his belt. How about Curtis Rourke?
I would say 6th or 7th round for Curtis Rourke.
Is there a spot? So a couple things about Curtis Rourke. One, we found out that he was playing with a torn ACL. Maybe he wasn't the most mobile dude to begin with, but then certainly I have a partially torn ACL right now. I wasn't super mobile to begin with either, but it would be hard to imagine running hard on it all the time. Does he have a spot in the Seahawks offense, or do they need someone that can move around a little better?
I think they need someone that can move a little bit better, given that the O-line is still going to be a work in progress, given the boot system that Kubiak and them like to run. My biggest holdup isn't even really the physical abilities with Curtis Rourke. It's more of, I've only seen you do it one time, one season in a big program, and when you played in some of the bigger games, you struggled. Mm-hmm. Those are my kind of holdups with him.
Do you remember that the Lewin career forecast that it said that Russell Wilson was like off the charts, but they took him off of it because he was too short? I wish that existed now, because there's so many of these guys. And Jackson Dart, you're like, he started 4 years in the SEC. Like, he should be off the moon with that career forecast. And it, that year it seemed it was pretty prophetic. I don't know, because it stopped being deployed every year. I don't know what it would have said over the years, But that year it had Russell Wilson way ahead of Andrew Luck and Robert Griffin III. I guess the last one that I missed that I know you like and I don't like him as much, and you can tell me if there's anyone, is Kyle McCord. And is there anyone else that I missed that you think is draftable for the Seahawks?
Well, Jackson Dart's obviously one of them. Jackson Dart, so I think he's round 2. That's why I think is a safe spot to take Jackson Dart. Kyle McCord, I see anywhere between round 3 and round 4. And the thing with McCord that I like, and you look at his game, and when I look at a quarterback and I look at how it's going to translate to the NFL, I look at kind of some main things. How do they handle 2-minute drill? How do they what is their completion percentage when under pressure, and what do they do on third down? And Kyle McCord does a lot of really good things in those 3 areas. And then you listen to what his coaches and teammates say about him, like he's a great leader. He left a big program in Ohio State after going 10-1 and losing 1 game to Michigan. Basically got told, hey, we're moving to Will Howard. We're moving off of you. I think if Kyle McCord's that quarterback this year for Ohio State, they still win the national championship. And they might not have lost the Oregon Ducks game in some respects. You then take him and he goes to Syracuse, and he makes Syracuse into all of a sudden this high explosive offense, and they don't exactly have right home talent there. He, to me, you get with him, you get the size. He's 6'3", he's 220. He's a rhythm passer with good arm strength. Like, he probably spins the ball outside of Tyler Shuck the best in the draft. And it's not very close with him and Shuck being at the top and then everyone else. For me, his comp would be a Derek Carr / Stafford in some respects. He's got all the arm angles. He can stand in the pocket. He's got a quick release. He does a really good job of scanning the field and getting through his progressions. If you watch his film, he does a really good job of getting from 1 to 2 to 3, and then if he has to get to his check down, get there. I think if you look at the system we run, and that's the other thing you got to look in the Seattle part of it for Kyle McCord, he fits exactly what this West Coast offense asks. Be precise, have quick reads, get the ball out of your hand, know where you're going with it. Those are things that all suit his game well.
Cool.